How's it going, guys? So this is the second Patreon exclusive tutorial for the month, but in a way this is two combined. But I wanted to deal with text. I've been doing a lot of studying with the Blender text tool and trying to see how good it is. So you can see here's my Instagram, but I wanted to specifically show you what I'm going to be teaching. So I made this text here, which was sort of I think it was the HBO or the Fox. I forget which one it was, but it was inspired by that. I wanted to be able to take a glowing text, but instead of making it look flat, because if you just add an emission texture, emission shader, it just looks flat. So I wanted to figure out how to add dimension to text. So I did that. So I'm going to show you how I figured out how to make dimension to glowing text, and as well as going to show you how to make this particular technique here. Both of them, you don't even need to convert the text. It's already editable. You can change the font, change the text, whatever you want to do. You can see it working right there. So I'm going to show you how to do both of those in one tutorial because I figured just teaching one was too quick and I want to make sure you guys have a good chunk of content. So let's go ahead with the first colorful one. And so what we're going to do is just get text, Shift A. Now you have to hit Tab to actually edit it. I like all caps, so we're going to go with that. Now let's switch over here to the character spacing area or the alignment and make everything center just to keep it the way I usually like to work. And then we need to add a font. So font, clicking that and go with a nice thick one. We're gonna go, I should be picky here. Let's go with this. Now let's go here to geometry. So extrude, and then we need to add some depth to it. And now we have the text. Not super important what font it is. Really the extrusion isn't super important either. Let's go ahead and make it an array. So when you get an empty plain axis to control the array, modifiers, add the array, uncheck relative, go here to object offset, that object being the empty. So now when we move the empty, we have another piece of text. So let's go ahead and make sure they're just barely touching. And then I'm gonna go with this many just to get the idea out. You can do as many as you want, but each color, of course, it's gonna be a different color. So let's go straight into shading. So now we have this guy. We're gonna be using a gradient to actually shade these different sections. So COL, we need a color ramp. So we have 4 different blocks, so we need 4 different colors. Hit the plus icon twice. Now we have that. We need to change it to constant, so we have a hard edge to distribute the colors. And then let's go ahead and just pick colors that are all next to each other. In my case, I used a color palette, but I'm just showing you how to do it, so that color palette isn't entirely necessary for today. You can go ahead and just pick whatever colors you want. Now let's get a gradient. Gradient texture, plug the color into the color. Now we're going to get a hit Control T. You need the Node Wrangler add-on enabled to use the Control T effect. But here we are. So we are at generated. We'll just go to object, doesn't really matter too much. And then on the rotation, we need to rotate it. Looks like rotate it on the Y by 90 degrees, and then let's see if we can move it up. Here we go. Okay, so we have the X location actually testing out. Okay, so the pink will be the first one that starts. So we have the X location right here, if I'm remembering correctly. So we have that. So we can move it with the color ramp, and then we have the blue on this one. Now we can move this color ramp to something like this. Let's see. Everything needs to be crunched in together first so that all very close together here in the color ramp so that when I move them around, it's a little bit more control. We want them all to be visible first. So now I'm holding down Control and pressing this, and then we can just play with the position on the color ramp to move them around. So we have that. Then we have the blue. So blue comes down, and now we're done. So you just move these guys around till we're doing that. But this is pretty boring. I want to have some white speckles going around this. So what we're going to do, add some more fun into the shading is a MIX Mix shader, we'll get another principled. Plug that there and keep it white as we want the specks, the polka dots basically, to be white. And then we're going to get here a color ramp. Color ramp, that's vertex color, always do that. So color ramp, linear to constant, because I do want the polka dots to be a hard edge and not a gradient edge. Now let's get in a Musgrave, Voronoi. And we need a whole new mapping setup, so we'll just hit Control T, object coordinates, distance, and keep these settings at default. And what that's going to do is allow me to use polka dots, and then I'm just going to invert the colors here. And now we have polka dots, and then we'll increase the scale to distribute them a little better. And now we have a really fun kind of cartoonish style shading on the text. And here's what's really great about this whole thing. Normally you would worry like, hey, it won't work with other fonts, words, let's say the word maybe. It even works with lowercase, and notice how the shading on the color, specific color, doesn't move. And you can also change the font as well, which is really, really useful, so you don't have to redo the shading. There we go. How nice is that? You have a great text, you can make it a PNG background, work it as a graphic design element, whatever you want to do. But this is really cool, really easy, and really fun. But what I'm going to do now is move on to the glowing kind of icy looking text. So we're going to get in just a plane, and then we'll go back here to text. And then again, big fan of all caps. TEXT. And I'm gonna hit RX90 to flip it. And then what I'm gonna do here is now just center out the base. Actually, no, I wanna center out this piece, but keep it on the baseline. I can scale it up a little. Actually, that doesn't really matter. Paragraph done. Font. I want a really nice sort of italic bold font. I guess that will work for now. Actually, it probably won't actually. We'll go with this, that works. Now, geometry, extrude it pretty well. And then back to the font. And I wanted to make it nice and bold so we can actually play with shading. So I do want to find a more bold but italic font for this actual idea, that sort of Fox inspired. This looks like the font I use. Okay. So if you want to achieve this effect, I would recommend bold fonts. And then actually we can only use one font, one letter at a time, because we are adding a gradient to the middle. Okay. And then all we need to do now is bevel it once and we're done. And it's way too thick, something like that. All right, let's go on into shading. So we have this guy. Let's make this floor here real quick, metallic, a little bit of roughness. And then we'll click new here. And we're gonna go with a transmission, no roughness, get a mix shader, emission material. There we go. I'm gonna give it a blue tint. We're gonna get a color ramp. And this is when we're gonna add that effect to give the text a little bit of dimension rather than it just being flat emission. I'm gonna give my strength at 30. So you noticed the text has no real dimension to it. It almost looks 2D, you know? There's no shading, there's nothing added to it that makes it look special or adds any dimension. So what I'm gonna do is add a gradient texture, hit Control T, go to the object, and on linear, we're actually gonna use spherical. What spherical is gonna do is be able to attack the edges of this material here. And so what we'll do is we'll just bring in the color just like that. We want the circle to be small so I can actually go to the location here on my object and edit where it's supposed to go. Z is not gonna work. Okay, Y and X is what we're trying to attack here. And then we'll make it bigger. And then again, we can play around with the Y and X location till we're happy. Now, You can see how this is a hard edge, and this part's totally showing the glass material. We don't like that. We're gonna go from linear to B-spline. Now you have a really soft gradient, and then you can just make that gradient harder. And there we go. We have the T, and look how it's adding some dimension to it. And if just to show you the value in that, I'll show you it compared to it without. So if you compare the two here, there's a little bit more dimensionality added to this one, really subtle. It's actually pretty subtle, but it makes it look a little bit more 3D. Notice how we can see the edges, we can see the lines, we can actually see through a little bit of this as well, with that gradient on our side rather than this being some solid 2D looking object. Notice this is completely flat. You can't even tell it's 3D. And this one you can tell it's 3D, but it still has glowing text. So what I'm gonna do now is just go ahead and make a word, make a quick word with this here. And I'll show you how the gradient still works. The gradient's a little bit harsh here on Eevee. We go here to cycles, it's a little bit better, and we can always go ahead and edit the size of the circle. So now I'll just take these guys and duplicate them. And we have a horribly kerned but nicely shaded text element. Of course, the gradient's a little too obvious, so you can go ahead and make that more subtle. But again, adding that to your text adds it a little bit more dimensionality, and you can even increase that, make that color a bit nicer. It's not blue enough in my opinion. So, and then we can take the gradients since they're all attached to the same shader. There we go. So we still have glowing text, but it is now nice and 3D rather than just sort of lame and 2D, but glowing. So there you go. Those are the two text effects I wanted to show you guys for today's tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something.